Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Molly was concentrating on drawing a bird on a sketchbook. The 7-year-old sang loudly out of eagerness. Betty looked up at her daughter's work. The woodpecker has a longer beak. You must have forgotten. Or did you decide to do a different bird? The girl looked up at her mother from below, but with a look of connoisseur remarked, "Mommy, I have a very good memory, and I know all the birds in our forest. It's just that sometimes my hands are like hooks, and because of them, I can't do anything." The woman kissed her daughter affectionately. "Your hands have nothing to do with it. They don't want to work because you've forgotten the most important thing." Molly loved these games. People are nasty. And immediately her right hand shook, like in school. "Wait, Mommy, don't say anything. I'm gonna guess it myself." "Okay, I'm gonna give you a chance to win this round. Answer me what's most important to little girls." Molly rolled her eyes funny and laughed. "You have to take more walks and also eat all the cereal. Right? And you smeared your car on the plate today and ate nothing. That's why your pens don't want to draw properly." From behind came the voice of the head of the family, and mother and daughter flinched. "What were you shouting, Maglees? Can't you be quiet about birds and nonsense? You're making a phantasmagoria here. If you are interested in such gibberish, others don't care about it." Betty looked at her husband. "Frank, you're on the wrong side of the bed. You got up on the wrong foot, and it's not for you to tell me what to do. You should be like a mouse. You're bending under the stove and sitting there until I call you." The man looked angrily at his wife and began to examine the contents of the pot. Finding nothing of interest, he threw the lid off by force. "Fucking porridge again. Can't you do anything substantial? And I can't chew on a can. I need a good piece of meat. I'm sorry, but I don't have anything to cook for you. All we have left is buckwheat and some pasta. It's also good that they lend me milk." The man ran around the small kitchen. "I'm amazed at your logic. You have the whole forest at your disposal with all its contents, and you're complaining. That's all it took. Slaughtered a wild boar or a boar and cooked your husband a hearty meal. Frank, you know that. Of course, I know that the preservation of flora and fauna is the highest goal for which one can starve. As they say, cobbler without boots. I'm not against those lofty ideas. But you can starve all you want, but you have to feed me properly." Molly decided it was her turn to speak her mind. "Daddy, you can have my sausages. I don't like them anyway. Just please don't yell at Mom." The man looked at the girl as if she were a little bug. There's another defender speaking out. "She's ready to give me her sausages. Oh my God, that's so generous. I'm gonna cry my eyes out. Baby, chew on that poison called sausage yourself. The whole product is stuffed with who knows what. And your mom is feeding you that crap." The last phrase was addressed to Betty, but the woman kept silent because she knew well about her husband's character. She saw that the volcano boiling inside him was about to erupt. "All right, Frank, if you're not satisfied with the porridge, I'll cycle down to the village and ask Wendy for a loan. You could have gone in the morning, instead of driving your husband crazy, although the husband has calmed down a bit." The woman moved to a safer place just in case. She explained in an apologetic tone, "You promised you'd get a paycheck, so I was hoping we'd only get paid at the end of the month, and even then I'd get pennies. Good for you for at least admitting that you're working for interest. If I was a gamekeeper, I'd be in chocolate. Our fridge is always empty. Even the mice haven't visited in a long time. Frank, please don't. You and I have been talking about this for a long time. And my paycheck is small because you took out a lot of loans." The man started spinning his glasses wildly. "You reproach me. You have to wash my feet and then drink water. A loose woman dares to reproach me. Get out of my sight. While I'm still kind. Frank, why do you say such things in front of the child? You don't like it. You should have thought of that before. All right, I'll keep my mouth shut." Betty was afraid to move. She stared at her husband with wide-open eyes and tried to control her nervous trembling. A warm baby palm touched her hand and even whispered for Mommy to go to the store. The woman obediently followed her daughter to the exit, but Frank decided not to miss the opportunity to say at the end of the family scene his weighty word. "I'll give you 2 hours. I hope I don't have to tell you twice." Yeah, as far as work goes, I'll be all set soon. I've been in touch with the right people, and they've promised me a money spot. So soon I'll be rich. I'll buy a cool car and drive around. Or maybe I'll move far away from here so I don't have to hear all this whining. Inspired by his fantasies about the future, Frank no longer paid attention to his wife and daughter, and his musings could be heard on the street. Betty deftly saddled his bicycle, and his daughter sat down in a comfortable chair that her grandfather had made during his lifetime. She thought gratefully of the old gamekeeper who had instilled in her a love of nature and taught her many useful things. "Molly, this chair Grandpa used to make for me. He used to take me on bike rides too. We rode all over the neighborhood." "Mom, is it true that Grandpa Stephen was afraid of poachers?" "It's true, daughter. Grandpa was very tough. When he ruled these woods, poachers were afraid to come. But now they are not afraid of you." The woman sighed heavily. "Why? They are afraid of me too, though not as much as Stephen. We have to go now, my daughter, or Daddy will swear at us." It had not rained for a long time, so it was safe to go through the forest. Betty had learned all the paths and took the shortest route. The village seemed to be the center of civilization. There were houses lined up in 2 rows along the main street, and cars and buses whizzed along the asphalt and smooth road in 2 directions. The most frequented places were the store and the dispensary. Betty and Molly headed straight for the outlet. Old women in Berlin scarves nodded at them. One even asked Betty, "Are you?" "I'm Wendy. I did not recognize you." Icicles on quite poor vision. Became an ophthalmologist, prescribed me batteries for 3+, but not enough. "It's time to get a magnifying glass." 2 elderly women, who had already said hello to the guests, decided to join the discussion. "It's you who's losing your eyesight, because you're used to being kicked around." The old woman was indignant. "What are you implying?" "I'm not used to hints. I'm telling it like it is. Do you like to watch other people's lives from behind a fence? Hence the problem." 3 old ladies began to argue, recalling each other's past sins, and even began to worry about the outcome of the skirmish. "Mom, these grandmothers aren't gonna fight." "Oh no, honey, they're very kind. It's just the way it is here." The girl looked around several times, as if afraid to miss the moment when the elderly spoiled need outside interference. So Betty had to literally drag the curious little girl along with her. It was chilly in the cramped confines of the store, and the satisfied salesgirl, upon seeing Betty, began to show off. Hello to her prouder. "I can see you're shocked, surprised and amazed. I'm the one who's doing all this for you customers. I had to storm our village hall to get an air conditioner installed in my shop. I've been going door to door for 2 years. I was even threatened with the closure of the store. But for every scrap, there is a scrap. And I have a carload and a cart full of such means." Betty knew the local customs and listened to Wendy's monologue. Then she asked if it was no secret who helped you to defend the truth. Wendy waved her hand as if warding off pesky flies. "What secrets are there? The whole village knows that I went to the deputy. I didn't even expect it to have such a quick effect on our bureaucratic tribe. They reacted instantly. They came running. The next day, people from the city came and installed this thing. And I realized I couldn't keep quiet. By the way, you can also signal to the right place." The young woman was surprised by this advice. "Why would I do that? I don't see the need to take her away yet. You're a forest ranger. One might say you're one of a kind." Wendy was clearly alluding to the fact that it's not a profession for women. At one time, the district authorities were quite skeptical of the idea of entrusting an important area to a young girl. But in the region, they learned about the fact that graduates of the capital's Forestry Institute put obstacles and sent a correspondent to deal with it. The guy turned out to be clever and wrote a big article called Betty, Mistress of the Forest. After this publication, the girl was the main heroine of the region for a month. For 8 years, those events a little weathered out of people's memory. Therefore, the mention of them by the magician's saleswoman made the young woman's heart beat frequently. Betty blushed and began stammering excuses. "Wendy, do you know how to embarrass people?" Now Molly will throw questions at me, and rightly so. "I have a question for you too. How long are we going to have outrages on our property?" "What are you talking about?" "Same thing. Vigilant justice. Or haven't you heard anything?" The young woman's surprise was genuine, which sent a new wave of indignation through Wendy. "Betty, it's like you were just born. Yes, we've had talk in the village for 2 weeks now about squatting. I don't know exactly, but people are saying that some businessman from the capital has bought the land adjacent to the preserve. Then again, rumor has it they're planning to grow all sorts of stuff here. I don't have to tell you how outsiders treat the land. They'll ruin it, poison it with these, as they're called." "That's a word," Betty suggested. "And the Jews." "Well, yes, those very ones." Wendy noticed that her story caused confusion in the shopper. "Didn't you hear anything?" "Honestly, I haven't. But I think it's just a rumor. After all, according to the law, you cannot sell land adjacent to the reserve, and our laws are strictly enforced." The saleswoman even took offense at such disregard for her information. "You don't believe me? It's my job to warn you. What are you doing here?" Betty realized that it was pointless to ask for a loan now. She sluggishly mumbled so simply, but little Molly, who had been silent until then, decided to speak up. "Aunt Kelly, Mommy is shy. We came here so you could give us groceries. Daddy was yelling at Mommy for feeding him gruel." The saleswoman flapped her painted eyelashes, but Molly's intervention was appropriate, because the woman turned all her anger against men. "Why didn't you say so? Standing there breaking things like you don't belong. I'd send a man like Frank away. He's used to living behind the kid, and he's making fun of me. I've got some cheap kits in my stash. You can make soup, and the sausage just came in yesterday." With 2 full bags, Betty and Molly returned home. Frank was resting in the hammock he had recently set up in the yard for his own use. He glanced lazily at his wife. "You're 15 minutes late, but I'll forgive you because you've completed your assignment. Go and prepare something for me." The woman obeyed the order of the domestic tyrant without complaint. She even wanted to swing in the hammock. She sometimes allowed herself that pleasure. When her father was away on business, but the girl did not dare to ask him, even intuitively felt that her father did not love her. She really wanted to understand the reason for this attitude. But she clearly learned that not all questions can be asked of adults. Stephen had long ago gone to the next world. But fellow countrymen remembered and spoke with respect about the old forester. The fate of the grandfather was shrouded in legends. Little Betty, as a child, holding her breath, listened to his stories about life, the forest, and various omens. The only thing the old man didn't really like to reminisce about was the war captives' youth. Stephen was a boy when the conquerors came to our land. His father immediately volunteered for the front, and his wife and 3 children stayed in the village. Stephen was the oldest, and on his shoulders fell the care of his younger brothers and little sister. A partisan detachment was organized in the area in the very first weeks of the war. The teenager volunteered to be a liaison. He accidentally came across a group of people in civilian clothes in the woods and immediately realized who was in front of him. "Take me. I know every tree in the forest and can understand the voices of birds. My uncle taught me that." Indeed, the boy's father was the first caretaker of the reserve. And since there were few candidates for the role of liaison, the command entrusted Stephen with this important job. The family at that time lived on the outskirts of the village, which has long since disappeared from the map. The settlement adjoined to the very swamps, and the Nices were afraid to go there. But with the onset of winter, everything changed, and the enemies began to play on the peaceful population. For his first defeats, the most terrible day for the guy was the day when his native village was burned down. News of the atrocities of the enemies reached the partisans, and they tried to save their relatives and ordinary inhabitants. One December day, the commander summoned the young liaison, Stephen, before and in his village received information from scouts that the fascists came close to the forest. Save your relatives and warn the others to run to the forest. The teenager ran, not paying attention to the burning lungs and frosty wind. He was already close to his home village, when first there was a rumble of thunder, and then the glow of a fire swept high into the sky. He cried for hours, waiting in the thicket for nightfall. There was nothing left of their village. A blizzard came up and began to carefully cover the traces of enemy atrocities. Stephen thrashed about, trying to find his relatives among the dead villagers. He shouted, "Mommy, children," but no one answered him. Finally, the guy found the place where all the remaining dead villagers were, and there were exactly 13 of them, opposite the clubhouse, which was built just before the war. Only this building remained untouched by the fire. All night, Stephen dug into the ground to bury the countrymen according to the Christian custom. Then he took a long time to wade through the frozen swamp to the detachment. For 3 days, the boy looked for his own, because at the previous place, they were not there. When he was brought to the commander hungry because of the dead Stephen, he did not recognize him. The boy looked like an old man and his black hair had turned gray. Betty learned this story from the old-timers, because Stephen himself did not like to remember about that hard time. Family drama directly related to her birth was also on the list of taboo topics. Only just before her death, her grandmother broke her vow of silence and told her granddaughter everything. It was as if she felt that there would never again be an opportunity to tell the girl about her father and mother. Stephen devoted his entire life to protecting the forest. There was no time to study at that time, and he finished only a 1-year course. At that time, there was a cry for higher education in the country, and in order to get a responsible position, it was necessary to have a crust. For the sake of obtaining the necessary document, a mature man and went to study. Stephen had often said, "What the hell do I need all this study for? I know more than those lecturers who know the forest from pictures." Younger students laughed at him. Take advantage of the moment when you have a chance to go out on the town. There's no one there to talk to. Is it only bears you can talk to? The forester was not offended by such jokes, but he explained his worries by his concern for the work he had been entrusted with. You're laughing. It won't be long before every tree will be worth its weight in gold. Look how the forests are being destroyed. That's why I'm worried about what might happen in my absence. What? But there's been no accidents in the reserve all year, and the ranger found his farm in perfect order. Stephen returned not alone, but with his young wife, Nancy. He had met his one and only love in the city. The girl was 10 years younger than him, but in ordinary life she was much more experienced than the country boy. Nancy liked to recall that time. I was sent from the collective farm to study to be a cook, but it seems fate itself was preparing this meeting for us. As soon as I saw him, I knew he was my man. When he proposed to me, I accepted without a second thought. And you know, granddaughters have never regretted this decision for all the years. After all, if you love a man, you with him will be good in any place, even in a remote forest. Telling about her life to her granddaughter, Nancy tried to pass on to her not only her personal experience, but also to tell her about the main values. It is important for any woman to have a reliable man by her side. In this respect, your grandfather can serve as an example. I mean, he and I have never had a fight. Really? Of course, we had some arguments about nothing, but never to reproach each other for something. Stephen has never raised his voice to me in his life, let alone raise his hand. We're less and less likely to raise your father in love and harmony. He grew up to be a real man. When Grandma remembered her son, tears always came to her eyes, and Stephen didn't like that. So it was only in his absence that Nancy allowed herself such weakness. Stephen named his son after his little brother, who was killed by the Nazis. God didn't give us children for a long time. Then a miracle happened. Stephen dreamed that his son would continue his work. He taught him to love all living things from the time he was a baby. His grandmother told how happily his grandfather accepted his son's decision to enter the Forestry Institute. He saw him off to his studies with such words of advice. In other words, you guy, don't relax too much. There are a lot of things in the city that can confuse you. It's kind of a test, and your mother and I want you to pass this exam with flying colors. James remembered the parental instruction, but did not intend to lead a Spartan lifestyle. The guy did not deny himself the pleasure of meeting beautiful girls, but he avoided serious relationships until he met a girl with a beautiful name, Miranda, a young resident of the city. So he liked her that he thought about her every minute. But if for James the main value was such simple concepts as love and loyalty, Miranda's life had a very different focus. The girl was used to a well-fed and rich life, and she saw her future even more comfortable. But she also fell in love with James without memory. Young people did not put in the notice of their parents about their intention to get married. They quietly signed and began to live together in a rented apartment. Nancy, telling about that period, carefully chose her words. When my father and I heard about it, we couldn't get over it for a long time. Stephen was very upset with James at the time. He wouldn't even answer his letters, so I can't tell you exactly what happened between them. All I know is that Miranda was fed up with her life. She acted like the old lady in the story of the fisherman and the fish. Every day she wanted more and more, and James had to fulfill all her demands. Betty listened attentively to this tale of life and only occasionally interrupted the story with a question. Grandma, didn't Daddy come home right after school? Nancy answered with a sigh. What about it? The young wife didn't want to hear about it. She raved about the foreign life. James had to look for work in the city, and those were troubled times. Crooks and criminals cleaned out the country. Your father got a job as a security guard for one such master of life. I'm not gonna lie, because I don't know exactly what happened between them. But my guess is the younger one went to her husband's employer. She really wanted to be a socialite. Even the baby didn't stop her. The girl was shocked by her grandmother's revelation. My mom left me. Is that really possible? Yes, she did. Maybe James didn't like to remember his failed love. Only once he confessed to me that Miranda left him a short note saying that she had fallen in love with someone else. She also asked her husband to take care of her daughter, which is you. She promised to take her back when she got settled in her new place. But after she left, she never showed up again. And James grabbed you and brought you to us. It's a shame that kids sometimes remember their parents when they're overprotective. Grandmother's story turned everything upside down in the young girl's soul. It was painful and hurtful to realize that you were abandoned by the closest and dearest person. For so many years, her grandfather and grandmother had told her stories about the tragic death of her mother, and she believed that's what happened. But it turns out that her mother is alive, and most likely happy. But despite Betty's worries, she was glad that she had learned the truth. Soon after the frank conversation, her grandmother died, and with her disappeared the warmth that had warmed their modest home. Betty shifted all the care to her grandfather, who after the death of his wife gave up a lot. His age was not young enough to avoid reopening old wounds. Betty avoided talking about her father only at night. A restless memory forced her to recall those events. When James returned to his native land, he immediately applied to the forestry department for employment. But his desire to become his father's assistant was met with wariness by the local authorities. One of the officials began to discourage the man. We were actually going to cut this position. You realize that times have changed, and we have to save every bill. So spending a lot of money is not in our plans. After hearing such a speech, James was about to look for a job outside his field. But Stephen himself, who still had connections in the top, intervened in the process. The old man was often ill, so the local officials still agreed to accept the son of a forester. But they warned James, you see, that this is a temporary position, because optimization in this sector is sure to happen in the very near future. It was the happiest time for Betty, because it was far to get to school from the cordon, and in wintertime it was unsafe. The girl lived in a boarding school, but she spent all her vacations with her father and grandfather. James was engaged in research activities, and the daughter helped him to set up in the forest. Photo traps. Stephen watched them with irony. Science, of course, useful work, but I and without your methods know what breathes in the forest. I grew up here, and every animal knows me, and I recognize their lives by their tracks. Trying not to offend my father, James replied, "Your experience is invaluable. Modern technology only helps fill in many of the gaps. Therefore, you should not give up on them. After all, mankind is exploring space, but knows very little about what is happening here on Earth. Therefore, one should not be frightened by innovations. If they are used rationally, it will be of great benefit to everyone." Stephen sighed heavily, but did not object to such arguments. Many flattering words about his son he heard from people when he visited the village. James, a local store clerk, was particularly enthusiastic. "Stephen, you have such a smart son. I read his articles in the neighborhood newspaper. How many books do you have to read to know so much?" The old man listened to the eulogies and proudly declared, "What's there to be surprised about? My school. I taught my son to love all living things from a young age, and I am glad that my lessons were not in vain." He realized that Kelly's interest goes far beyond knowledge alone. Kind and sociable woman was unhappy in private life, but did not lose hope to find a worthy companion. Stephen liked the saleswoman, and he himself more than once hinted to his son to pay male attention to her. "James, you're not a monk to live alone. Marry a good woman, and Betty would be more fun." The son knew his father's character well and understood where he was going with it. "I'd like to have a family, but I'm not looking for a bride in the woods." "Why the woods? There's a good candidate." In the neighboring village, James pretended not to know who he was talking about. "Father, what are you doing? There are only old ladies left in the village. All the young people have long gone to the cities." Stephen said solemnly, "You're overdoing it about the old ladies. There are young ladies in the village, like Kelly, a good woman, decent. You should take a look at her. See if things could work out between you two." Perhaps his father's advice had worked, and James began to frequent the village store. These visits had a positive effect. The women literally blossomed and cheered up. There were already whispers in the village that the forester and the shop girls would soon be creaking their union with signatures at the registry office. Betty, too, was approving of her father's possible marriage, but a new misfortune had befallen the old forester's family. James went to town to settle some business and did not return. For days, nothing was heard of him. It wasn't until the 5th day that a policeman came to the cordon. Betty realized everything when he took off his hat. "Courage, Stephen. And you, Betty." "No more." James found his car, and he's there in the river. Did the deafening scream of the poor old man break the silence? "No, I don't believe it. Give me my son back." The death of the gamekeeper stirred not only the surrounding villages. This egregious case quickly reached the regional authorities. Thanks to their intervention, local officials were not able to write it all off as an accident. The investigation lasted several months, and very influential people prevented the cause of the tragedy in every possible way. But still, the truth triumphed, and many officials lost their soft chairs. It turned out that James died as a result of a well-developed plan of intruders. When he showed up at the poacher's cordon, it was a tough time. Although the old forester was also struggling, but due to his venerable age, he could no longer keep track of everything that was going on in his farm. The usual Stephen was already at the scene of a crime, and catch the villains by the hand he could not manage. And the son of a forester began to use new means in his work. Even the same photo traps, which the gamekeeper set in the forest, helped to identify violators. In addition to technical means, James regularly conducted raids with the involvement of volunteers. After a few months, these preventive measures had already yielded results, but many people were not satisfied with the zeal of the young gamekeeper, and he began to openly threaten. Several times Betty made her father in a depressed state, but to her questions he answered with a smile, "Do not worry, daughter. everything is fine. I'm just a little tired, but soon things will turn around, and we'll all be happy. You are not against universal happiness." The girl understood perfectly well that her father was embarrassed to tell about his secret meetings with Kelly. For a long time, she pretended not to notice anything. Only a few days before the tragedy, she herself told her father, "Dad, I know that you are afraid that I will be against your marriage, but I want to ease your plight so that you do not torment yourself with doubts. I'm in favor. I like Wendy, and we're friends." She remembers her father's delight and squeezing her in his arms. "Thank you for your candor, daughter. I really didn't know how to tell you. I mean, this doesn't happen every day. And it's embarrassing that I've decided to be a groom at this age." James was in high spirits for a few days, and then his face turned gray with worry. The night before he disappeared, someone called him. Betty only heard the last phrase her father said to the invisible interlocutor. "I'm not changing my mind, and as long as I'm in charge of the household I've been entrusted with, there will be no such entertainment as status hunting on my property." In less than an hour, Dad left in a hurry. Betty had no idea it was the last time she'd see him alive. The loss of her loved one, and Kelly was hard to bear. Sobbing, the woman was hardly torn away from the fresh grave, unhappy and did not say, as it should be according to the old custom. She quietly asked why. "For what sins have I suffered such grief? Why was my beloved man taken away from me? How can I live with it now?" But these questions were never answered. Kelly, even now, after several years, has not forgotten her love. She constantly visited James's grave and always left a bunch of fresh wildflowers there. Although the attractive saleswoman was courted by many men, she did not reciprocate. Probably, Kelly was just afraid to miss her happiness once again. After the tragic death of his son Stephen did not last long. Immediately after the funeral, he fell ill, and for weeks he was plagued by fever. Betty persuaded her grandfather. "Let me call a doctor. I'll put you in the hospital. They will treat you there, and you will be healthy again." The old man answered everything in a dead voice. "Granddaughter said I've done my part. It's time to get ready for the long journey." The girl at first did not understand what road the grandfather is talking about. "When you fix it, then we'll go." "Where do you want to go?" The forester only smirked. "You won't be accepted there. I'll go alone." The girl looked at the old man with horror. Only after these words did she realize which road the old man was talking about. "Grandfather, don't you dare say such a thing in front of me. Are you really going to leave me alone? Have you thought about how I'm going to live? I have no one but you." "It's okay, granddaughter. You'll manage because you are strong. Soon you'll study, get a profession, and continue our family business." "Grandpa, what are you talking about? How can a girl become a forester? We have equal rights in our country. Women are flying into space, flying airplanes and ships. Forestry is much easier, especially for you." Stephen died quietly in his sleep with a serene smile on his face. Betty thought he was greeted by Nancy and his son. That's why he was smiling before he died. The girl considered her grandfather's last words as the main point of his will. After all, the old man had left no riches after him except the forest. But when she declared her intention to continue the family business, the officials sighed. "Betty, well, why do you willingly take these on your fragile shoulders? Such a burden. Of course, we have no doubt that you can handle this responsible job. But do you have any idea how you'll live alone, away from people?" Although the girl's heart was trembling with fear, she answered courageously, "I have lived in the forest for so many years that I can't imagine another life, and I'm not afraid of loud words, but I consider it a duty of honor to continue the work of my grandfather and father." "You're desperate. But if you think of it, let us know in advance so we can find a replacement. The forest is one of our nation's greatest assets, and we have a duty to preserve its natural resources." After she was approved for the position, Betty rode her bicycle back home. She spent the whole ride thinking about how easily some people adjust to the realities of the current time. Stephen called such characters opportunists. "Granddaughter, Never trust people like that. They'll promise you a golden mountain today. Tomorrow the wind will blow in the other direction, and they will retract their words. They are not people, but a weather vane. The girl smiled at her thoughts, because from afar she saw the primitive meteorological device mentioned by her grandfather spinning at breakneck speed on the roof of the house. Yes, Grandpa, there are a lot of weather vanes nowadays, as if in such an environment she would not lose the ability to hear others, regardless of the direction of the wind. Betty had not yet had time to fully settle into her new position, as the head of the village administration urgently summoned her on the carpet. Stammering and badly lost from excitement, he reported, "Well, here's to that one. Be damned. Emancipation from the regional newspaper. A correspondent is coming to us. So get ready, Betty, and make sure you don't say anything unnecessary." "Okay, I'll do my best." The girl considered the audience finished and headed for the exit, but the official stopped her. "Listen, you're my favorite. Let's do it this way. You'll bring me the text of your report tomorrow morning." "What report?" The correspondents themselves ask questions to be answered. "And I've been told in confidence that the newspaper guy here is young and green, like the trees in your forest. He's a city boy and doesn't know anything about forestry. He will immediately come to me, and I'll give him the right attitude, and everything will work out for the best. And most importantly, correctly and without unnecessary intricacies. All right, I'll bring you the report tomorrow. You approve it? Attaboy." It's nice when people understand each other half-heartedly. 2 days later, in V Village arrived a young correspondent. Although this man literally changed the girl's life, she diligently drove away the memories of those days, or rather a wonderful week, which gave her true love. William looked at the screen and sighed heavily, because this call he could not reset. The staff looked away understandingly, although curiosity was a professional trait of the press staff. Sometimes it had to be pushed to the furthest corner, as etiquette rules had never been abolished. William looked gratefully at his colleagues. "Excuse me for a moment. It's an important conversation." Everyone nodded their heads in agreement, but only the editor-in-chief disappeared. The editorial staff began to discuss the latest developments. The echoes of their lively discussion reached William, who had secluded himself in the back room. He could hardly hide his irritation. "Dad, how many times have I asked you not to call me at this hour? I'm in the middle of a production meeting, and I can't talk long." There was a grunt of displeasure in the receiver. "I see you're getting cocky. How do you talk to your father? I'm not a bizarre girl to make such remarks to me. I'll call my own son when I see fit. I want you to answer me respectfully. I don't care if you've risen to a high position. By the way, I'm not the only one who got you the chief's chair, so why don't you take it down a notch?" "Okay, Dad, I'm sorry. I'm listening to you very carefully." "Same here. As available. Stop by my office. But I have a lot of things to do." "That's okay. Your business can wait. This is urgent. By the way, I don't see brooms either. I'm in the middle of some serious business, so I'm waiting for you." "Okay, I'll be at your place in half an hour." William's father's authority had been an unbreakable rock since childhood. But if in his school years he did not cause much discomfort and even helped him to achieve what he wanted, now his father's habit of sticking his nose in everywhere and giving instructions weighed down on the young man. Many times he tried to slip out of his father's care, but all his attempts failed. Liam did not tolerate disobedience, and the mature age of his son did not matter to him at all. So William had to fulfill all the whims of his status parent. The mood went completely negative, and returning to the office, the editor grudgingly remarked, "Would you work with such activity as you are now discussing gossip? You give such materials that it's a shame to put them in print." Recently, Cindy, a journalism graduate, said with graduation remorse, "You're right, William, we've gone wild. And that's because there is no one to teach us how to present information properly from the first day we enter the newsroom." William had been annoyed with the perky girl before, and now he can't help himself either. "It's not for you to make statements like that. You've had 5 years of schooling, and the state has spent money on you. William, I was a paid student on a budget. A chuckle was heard, which infuriated the young editor even more. Cindy, save your jokes for your subscribers. I'm sure you'll gain a lot of likes. The girl artistically rounded brown eyes. Thank you. I didn't even expect you to read my posts. By the way, you signed up. He realized it was the girl trying to piss him off. But he didn't. No, I don't waste my time on such nonsense. I'm preoccupied with more serious things. For instance, where are the promised farming materials? The girl's face turned red and her eyes glistened. William, how can I fulfill your assignments on time if I'm so ignorant of the subject? I have the impression that you give me such impossible tasks on purpose. You're not wrong. Indeed, I do it on purpose because a journalist must know what he is writing about. And you've had plenty of time to do a little research on this fascinating subject. But I told you, I'm more of a culture guide or something more straightforward. You can't just jump on a person like that. You can, and you should. Anybody else have any questions? If not, you're free to go. Yes, and please, dear colleagues, try to submit your materials on time. Disgruntled murmurs filled the cramped office space. But William was already accustomed to such costs of a managerial position. He had only been in the position for a month, and his predecessor had not paid much attention to discipline in the team. However, it was for this that he paid the price, and with honor was sent to a well-deserved rest. The main office of the company, which was headed by Liam, was located in the very center of the city. The stylish design of the premises and the uniforms of the employees left a pleasant impression. William had always envied his father's business acumen, and in his dreams he imagined himself as successful as he was. When he arrived, the pretty secretary stood at attention. "Is Liam expecting you?" The father greeted his son with a smile. He began with a rebuke. "And if it weren't for my persistent calls, I'd probably see you even less often. Vova, would you at least feel sorry for your mom? She's always waiting for you, worrying about you. Dad, but I'm so busy right now. You understand that the editors demand that I do my best. But I promise to do better. And tell your mom I'm sorry 1,000 times. As soon as I've cleared out a little bit, I'll be sure to come visit you. I'll take you at your word. But I called you for a completely different reason." The businessman's face immediately became serious. The son guessed that his father was concentrating on how to start the conversation. "Dad, something's wrong, I think. Or do I really hear your brain squeaking in your skull?" Liam gave William a strained smile. "Stop bad-mouthing your father and your jokes. And I'm not laughing. I've heard rumors that your sharks of the pen are going where they shouldn't be. I don't get it. Can you elaborate on that? And actually, I've always been convinced that we don't have any taboo subjects. Am I wrong?" The master of the office was clearly nervous. He began mindlessly shifting papers on his huge desk. Then he asked the secretary to bring tea. "Would you like some?" "I'd love some, but you still haven't told me your grievances. How did you resent the editorial staff?" "I don't know who wrote the article with the headline, 'How to Sell Nature for a Profit.' The article was signed by Max. And what didn't you like about the article?" "Everything. And I'd wipe Max's feet with it." Liam was breathing heavily, and his forehead was covered with vapor. William sat in the chair across from his father with a nonchalant look. "Let me get to the fulfillment of my wish. Here I am in front of you. Which foot do you want to start with? The left or the right? Starting now. After all, Max is my editorial pseudonym." The master of the office froze in amazement. "Will, you're the one who built me such a goat. I didn't expect such a setup for my own son. I still don't understand what you resent about that piece. Everything is based on facts. People write to us, and we have to react. But before we react, it would be a good idea to get to the bottom of it first. You might be surprised that our company is buying up ownerless land. There's nothing of value there, just wastelands and ravines." William interrupted her father. "From the flood meadows. Dad, You know very well that all the territories adjacent to wildlife preserves are under special control. These lands cannot be sold. It's the law. We didn't encroach on the conservation area. These are all misinterpretations, but even if that's true, what's wrong with these territories being about culture? So much useful space is lost. Is that being a landlord? Can these derelict lands be planted or a tourist complex built? You don't have to go on, because I know what you're going to say next. Dad, you don't have to convince me that what you're saying is right, but you realize that there are a lot of other values in this world besides money. Liam was walking around his office. Not from you, son, but it's your choice. And if you're gonna take me on, I have a way to calm you down too. Whoa, are you threatening me? No, I'm just warning you. The businessman stepped closer to his son, and William stood up, glaring at his opponent with his eyes. Liam stated, "Are you really naive to the point of believing your accidental appointment as editor-in-chief? No, my son, it was your father who made sure your ass was comfortable in the cushioned chair. But you have to realize that other winds may blow, and you'll be back out in the fields and construction sites with a notebook." You know, Father, I'm not afraid of that. I'd rather work as a reporter than sit around with my pants down. What did you say in the easy chair? If that's all, I'm gonna have to decline. And thank you for the candid conversation. This conversation has reawakened long-standing resentments against my father. Liam was careful to dampen those initiatives of his son that, in his opinion, could harm his personal reputation and the company. He carefully monitored all of William's publications. It was for this reason that the young journalist had to take a pseudonym. The first scandal between the son and his father broke out on professional grounds almost 8 years ago. Then William wrote his first serious material, which received a wide resonance in the public environment, although the topic was neutral. But in it, the journalism graduate deliberately touched on the issue of natural resources protection. In those days, rich people were actively buying up plots of land for summer residences in nature reserves without any obstacles. Greedy officials turned a blind eye to this lawlessness. When the young man returned from his business trip, his father immediately attacked him. "William, why are you sticking your nose where it doesn't belong? If you were younger, I'd be sure to give you hundreds of smacks. But to use physical force on a great age, and it became pointless." The young man expected anything but such an angry tirade. Dad's not happy about something. Everyone praises me for my bold material. The fools praise, but the smart ones keep quiet. Dad, what's the matter? Well, it's over now. But for the future, remember to think not only about personal glory, but also about the consequences. You know how a poet had a great saying about that. We can't predict how our word will come back. Good point. I agree, Father. That famous phrase belongs to Bailoran. Oh yeah, I didn't realize I knew so much about the classics, but you don't talk back to me. Remember my warning. All right, Father. I'll be sure to check the box against it, so I don't forget. William expected that after his first dizzying success, he would be given the most important assignments, but the editor gave him topics on an ad hoc basis. Such a dismissive attitude angered the young specialist, and he himself appeared in the office of the chief. "David, I demand justice. What are you dissatisfied with, my young friend? You're still asking why you're giving me some everyday stuff. I'm not interested in writing about an old lady of flowers and a bush sculpture. You told me yourself I was right for serious work. Well, did I? No, and one of us is so exclusive. Others also want to write on topical issues and get paid well for their creative skills. And here I am in this chair having to please everyone. It's like a hot frying pan. So let's not argue. All in good time, and you'll get your big break." David turned out to be a prophet, and William took his place. The old man was upset when he found out he was being forced to take a well-deserved vacation. Unfortunately, William, it happens so often in life that you are first used all over Ivanovo, then you are thrown into the landfill for uselessness. The young man was somewhat uncomfortable when he learned of his appointment, but the old editor calmed him. "Not torment my friend with attacks of conscience. It's all right. According to the laws of nature, the strong defeat those who are already out of circulation. According to Darwin, it's called natural selection. Yeah, I was just thinking about nature. Remember when you were bugging me for assignments after that sensational article about the woodland wizard? Of course I do. But what's your point? Because some very powerful people asked me to put you in a cage. Yes, that's what they told me. Put this young ferret in a cage so he wouldn't stink up the place. I remember laughing really hard at that imagery at the time. It was aptly put. Unlike the old editor, William was not thrilled to be compared to a rather unpleasant fauna. But now, after comparing all the data, he realized that his removal from the old topics had also been orchestrated by his father. He did not hold back and said aloud, "Until when will my father lead me?" Against his background, I feel like a defective teenager. I think father likes that. And this conclusion was true, because Liam had many tools to influence his stubborn son. William also guessed it, but did not know what his father would use against him in the next round of confrontation. Only a few days had passed since the unpleasant conversation with his father, and William had calmed down a little. The day before, he had received a call from the city administration asking him to send a correspondent to important events. "William, we have a meeting with young people scheduled. The event will be in a roundtable format. That means questions, answers, so to speak, a useful dialogue. And the topic we have planned is safe environment. But I think, in the course of the conversation, we will touch on other topical issues." "Okay, I'll send someone over." William initially wanted to assign Cindy to cover the event, but it turned out that the girl was sick. Since there was no time, he decided to go himself. The discussion was so boring that after 5 minutes, all the participants were frankly beating themselves up. The speakers stared into their sheets without a break, and William guessed that the questions were handed out to them by the organizers of the event. A few minutes before it began, he glanced at his watch often, waiting for the event to end, but at the very curtain. One kid with glasses, who apparently didn't get a question on duty, asked for the floor. "Benjamin, a second-year student at the Pedagogical University. I have my own question on the subject. Why are we silent about the misuse of resources?" The audience immediately stirred. From the outside, it seemed as if all 36 participants of the round table had taken a cheer pill at the same time. William also looked at the daredevil with interest. "Dimitri, what resources do you want to talk about?" The guy, without a shadow of embarrassment, stated about all of them. "You don't need to be a Nobel laureate to appreciate the scale of the changes taking place. It's all happening right in front of our eyes, and we turn our faces away as if we don't notice it. Water sources are being poisoned. Forests are being cut down. Birds and animals are dying. And it's all happening right here, right now. I mean, right in front of our eyes. And you can give as many concrete examples as you want. I run a blog, and people write to me from all over the world. Recently, just a couple of days ago, a woman wrote to me. She works as a gamekeeper. It's interesting. And what was the problem? What made her come to you? I mean, she's asking for help. Yes, the local authorities are looking at her understandably shaky, and she doesn't know where to write. So I decided to bring this issue to the discussion. In short, it's about the protection of our nature reserves. One of the organizers of the event got excited. Let's not go beyond the scope of our program today. Your question, Benjamin, is not on the agenda, so let's strictly follow the rules. This interference surprised the editor, and he decided to stand up for the student. I think this issue deserves attention, and the topic is very hot. After all, it is no secret that the smaller part of the population, that is, the elite, allows itself any whim for a lot of money. Dimitri, you can leave me the coordinates of this gamekeeper. She is a woman, works in the forestry after the institute. I'll give you her addresses. The student quickly wrote something on a piece of notepaper, but the editor didn't have time because he got a call from the secretary at the editorial office. "William, are they expecting you? Come as soon as possible." Outside his office, William saw a visitor who smelled of discontent. The woman didn't even bother to say hello, but started with threats. "Oh, you're the editor-in-chief of this yellow paper. Why are you being so rude? Our publication will soon be 100 years old, and we always stand up for the interests of our citizens. I can see how protective you are. You have no problem slandering the good name. You print nonsense, and then you can't go out on the street." William had learned to understand people's psychology and realized that it would be a long conversation. He said in a steady voice, "Let's go to my office, and you can tell me everything." A few minutes were enough to find out what the visitor was offended by. It turned out that the summary had mistakenly mentioned her data. The woman was crying. "Why should I be dishonored like this? I'm an honest businessman. I pay everything on time. And they put me on the criminal list." William had to apologize. A retraction will be published in the next issue. The employee who made this mistake will be punished. The woman was scared. "Will you fire him?" "I can't say for sure yet, but we'll take away his bonus." "Absolutely." The visitor left to strangle the editor. It was troubling. He called an emergency meeting. Whose mistake was it? How could you confuse a drunken car thief with a wedding salon owner? Forgivable, if there were details that matched. But everyone here is different. Everyone's silent, heads down. All right. Cell phone rings. Everyone's quiet. Then I'll have all the materials on my desk with the proofreader's corrections. The person in charge of the issue quietly asked that Cindy didn't miss it. "I missed it too. That's why it's just the two of us." "Of course you will. But you can't be so irresponsible. Imagine yourself in that poor woman's shoes. What would it be like to walk around town and feel people pointing fingers at you? You can't explain to everyone that it wasn't you who stole the car, and even if you were in a disgraceful state." Yeah, that was nasty. It was only in the evening that William remembered the note. He ran his eyes over the tiny piece of paper, but the name didn't tell him anything. The only thing that seemed familiar was the name of the village. He was so tired that he didn't even look for the village on the map for the sake of interest. Tomorrow he'd have a fresh start. Before falling asleep, William still had time to think that there was one very pleasant moment in his life, the absence of his father's control in his small apartment. He didn't want to remember that it was his father who had given him the property. Liam, handing over the keys, said, "A condition: I want you to live here with your family, not to have parties. My mother has been dreaming of grandchildren for a long time, and you're still a bachelor." He didn't say anything to his father, but he thought that he was fine on his own for now. This thought flashed in his mind again when he was already on the threshold of sweet sleep. Betty tried not to make any noise so as not to accidentally wake her husband. Frank had been working for a week, or rather guarding the area around the reserve. He was proud of the business he had received and was already making fantastic plans for the future. "I'll get on my feet and start my own business." Frank had started so many times and always failed. "Maybe we shouldn't push our luck anymore. What do you know about business? Look, hillbilly, you've never seen more than this forest." Betty knew it was useless to argue with her husband and kept silent. Frank didn't want to argue either. After breakfast, he decided to rest. "Look, I'm going to sleep, and you two are to sit like mice." "You got it. Calm down. You're boring me with your instructions. Tell me more skills." Men having fun on the couch. And a second later, there was a powerful snore. The woman signaled her daughter to follow her into the kitchen. While she was cooking, Molly was drawing with passion. The girl was muttering something under her nose, and this peculiarity caused a $1 million smile on the mother's face. Molly mumbled something there, as if it was an incantation. The girl rejoiced. "Mommy, you guessed it. Do you remember the last time you bought me fairy tales when we went to the village with you?" "Of course I remember. But I read the whole book and memorized all the pictures. I also learned a spell." The girl stood in the middle of the kitchen and waved her pencil like a magic wand. "You have to make a wish first, and then tell me what the rake was." Boom. Engrossed in the game, the girl said the magic words quite loudly. and immediately from the next room heard a displeased shout, "Frank, one more prank like that, and I'll put you both out on the street. Is it so hard to be quiet for a while?" And Molly could use some fresh air, sitting around with her drawings all day. Betty whispered, "Daughter, Daddy's angry, let's keep it down. Or is he? Maybe you should go outside." The girl made a serious face. "Mommy, can I just draw the principal and then go outside?" "Can I? Wait a minute. Who are you drawing?" "I told you the prince. He's gonna come and get us. And then you'll marry him. And you'll have lots of children, just like in the fairy tale. I'll nurse the little ones, and when they grow up, I'll teach them to paint. That's a nice fairy tale you've got there, but we can't leave Daddy." The girl cocked her eyebrows and looked at her mother. "Yes, we can. Frank is bad, and I don't love him because he doesn't love us either." The woman at school on the girl. But it was too late. The husband stood in the doorway with a menacing look. "Well, you little thing, tell me about Mommy's prince. What kind of car should he drive to pick you up? I wondered where you often ride your bike to. She's got a lover, and she's trying to horn in on him." Frank clenched his fists and went for Betty. But little Molly got in his way. "Don't you dare touch my mom. I won't call you Daddy anymore because you're bad." The man grabbed the child by the scruff of the neck and lifted her above him. From surprise and fright, the girl scrambled and began to flail her legs haphazardly. One blow landed on her face, and Frank became furious. "You're getting run over now, too." And he forcefully squeezed at the collar of a light dress. And the girl sang, "Mommy, it doesn't hurt to breathe." Not thinking about the consequences, Betty grabbed from the table the board and with all her might hit her husband on the head. He rolled his eyes and collapsed to the floor. Went smart breathing. The woman realized that the man was alive and would soon wake up, and that didn't bode well. She grabbed the girl, who had yet to regain consciousness, and rushed to the door. "Daughter, let's get out of here, otherwise he'll kill us. I promise you I'll get him out of the house." But they didn't get far from the house. They heard the screams of an angry man behind them. "Stop, or I won't be able to take care of myself. Betty, for the last time, come back nicely. You know I'll get you out from under the ground and wind you up on a birch tree." It is not by chance that they say that in an extreme situation the human brain works at an incredible speed. An inner voice reminded Betty about the secret path leading directly to the settlement. But the woman didn't take into account that many years had passed since she was hiding there from her grandfather, and that path over the cliff had become a dangerous trap. "Molly, stay here while I jump over, and then I'll help you." But instead of landing successfully on the opposite side of the cliff, the woman plummeted down. She tumbled down into the deepest part of the ravine. And during her flight, she hit her head twice on the driftwood sticking out everywhere. Molly looked down at her mother, who was lying motionless, and whispered softly, "Mommy, honey, I'll be patient now." The girl was afraid to scream, because then they would definitely find them. "Frank." She carefully went downstairs and again quietly called, "Mommy, you are not dead. If you die, what will I do?" Molly squatted down, afraid to touch her mother. She felt very scared and cried bitterly. Suddenly, right above her head-loaded branches under someone's feet, the girl was afraid to move, and her heart bunny jumped in her chest. She tightly squeezed her eyes shut and prepared for the worst. Footsteps were already close, and then an unfamiliar voice asked, "Hey, little girl, what's wrong?" Molly looked over there, where this pleasant and not at all evil voice was coming from, and asked in surprise, "You're the prince. Why were you gone so long?" "My mom and I waited and waited. And then Frank attacked us, and we ran away. Mom fell off a cliff, but she's alive, like a princess in a fairy tale." He looked at the little girl and didn't know what to say to her. The woman moved. "Oh my God, I think I broke my leg. Molly, where are you?" "Mommy, I'm here." It was damp and gloomy at the bottom of the ravine. So William, who just happened to be in the right place at the right time, didn't get a good look at the victim right away. He bent over her, trying to help her up, and I saw bottomless eyes. Only one girl in the world had such lake eyes, and he, not believing in coincidence, asked, "It's you. How did you fall off the cliff?" "It was an accident. It's the cost of the chase." "And what were you trying to hide from? A pack of wolves or a bear?" "No, a double predator." The woman was looking at his face too. "God, I can't believe I didn't recognize you. You sound familiar." "I can't remember. No wonder it's been so long. I didn't recognize you at first either. And it's so dark out here, you can't even see a stone's throw away. Yeah, it's not a good place. Everyone avoids it here. It's a well. If it's not too much trouble, help me up." The man helped the victim to take a natural position, but only she tried to stand on her leg. A wild pain with an electric current pierced the whole body. Molly frightenedly asked Mommy, "Are you in a lot of pain?" "It hurts a lot, but it will go away." William looked at her swollen ankle and shook his head. "At best you have sprains and bruises on your face, and I hit my head during a fall. It hurts and spins a lot. It's okay. We're gonna get you to the hospital and get you some help. I have cars nearby. I'm here on an errand again, so I thought I'd visit the forester's house first, and then I'll have to find Betty." "Do you know a woman like that?" Betty had forgotten her caution and was leaning on her injured leg. A grimace of pain contorted her face. "It's me, Betty. How so?" "I didn't realize it was you Ben was telling me about. You know Benjamin, if you can call it an acquaintance. We've been chatting with him. I got the tip from our sales girl. She has a computer. The only thing we have on the farm is a TV, and it doesn't show very well." William helped the woman into the car and then sat down next to the driver. "That's a fine-looking daughter of yours, just like her mom. How old is she?" The woman was embarrassed. 7. She was in May. That's a good age. The car had no sooner gone around the corner than Frank appeared on the road. The girl screamed, "Mommy, look, he's not catching up with us." "No, daughter, the car is going faster." William looked in the rearview mirror too. "You're not to be invited, are you? Why did you marry such a troublemaker?" In a broken voice, the woman replied, "I had no other choice. You see, that's what happens when you act against your will." Betty wanted to continue, but looked at her daughter and stopped talking. The village outpatient clinic was designed for walking patients only. There used to be a few emergency beds. Then the inpatient department was closed. Therefore, many people had to go to the district for qualified help. The paramedic looked at us of the local forest. "I owe you one. I have not forgotten that I owe you my life. Now it's my turn to repay you in kind." The car ran sharply down the level roadway. Molly whirled her head around and had no time to marvel, but the adults had no time to admire the surrounding scenery. Both William and Betty were remembering the encounter that had brought them together one day on their first visit to the village. The aspiring journalist dreamed of covering the whole world. He had never been to the village before, and he was struck by the extraordinary color of this place, lost among the forests and marshes. Betty was also experiencing a period of excitement, because for the first time in her life, she realized her importance. After all, she was entrusted to keep order in the forest, and this is worth a lot. Of course, the report signed by the head of the settlement was not useful to the girl, because the correspondent was not interested in the dry figures of the report. He wanted to write a live material about a young girl who chose an unusual profession, and he was so enthusiastic about this process that he wanted to learn about the peculiarities of flora and fauna. He asked the girl Betty, "Tell me, where can I snap some beautiful pictures here? The views are amazing, but I'd like to capture something unusual." The girl thought for a minute and then waved her hands uncertainly. "I don't know what to advise you. Go to the river. The sunsets are very beautiful there. What about the forest?" The forest mistress then threw him a critical glance. "I wouldn't advise you to go into the forest alone. It's easy for an ignorant man to lose his way. And there's a swamp nearby. Very dangerous. Betty had urgent business to attend to, so she left the journalist alone. Against her advice, William went into the woods. He spent hours clicking his camera, and when he realized he was lost, dusk began to fade over the forest, and the guy was scared. He started rushing between the trees, trying to find a path. Suddenly, he had a stroke of luck. Right in front of him, he saw a meadow or a field, and he rushed headlong towards what he thought was salvation. But the delight did not last long, because after only a few steps, he fell into something soft, and the sticky attempt to get out of the mire only aggravated the situation. The substance sucked him in more and more, and he began to cry out, "Save me, help me." But with each cry, his strength was draining away, and his hope for salvation was fading. Suddenly, from somewhere in the thick darkness came the familiar voice of William. "Hold on, and try not to move." It was Betty. He still doesn't know how she knew he was in trouble. The swamp was up to his shoulders. A little more, and the swamp would have swallowed him whole. But the girl, disregarding her own safety, pulled him out of the mire. The shock must have been so strong that the young man came down with a high fever the next day. The girl attributed his illness to the taste of some special mosquitoes. They spent a whole week together, and it was the most unforgettable days of his life. William had left for some reason. Honestly, he couldn't have said why. Probably at that time he was not right for love, for real serious love. In his head was only a career for a new material, which promised to become a sensation. Though he was still a very young journalist, he had an unmistakable sense of sensation. As I pondered, the neighborhood hospital showed up ahead. He turned to Betty Molly, but here we were. William helped Betty jump at first, but then realized it was taking too long and just picked her up in his arms. At the emergency room, they were asked to wait. "We'll put the man in a cast, and then we'll take you in." Molly sat huddled against her mother. There was an awkward pause, and the girl's voice sounded quite loud. "Mom, how will you kick him out? He'll fight again." The girl lost her neck, and William saw fresh bruises. He looked at Betty in surprise. She lowered her head. "I don't know, Molly. We need a divorce. Now it's a leg. Mom, but Uncle William will take us where we need to go." "Really, Uncle William?" He grinned involuntarily, of course. It can't be otherwise. A nurse came out of the office. "Come in." William jumped up, but the nurse gave a shoulder, and Betty disappeared behind the door. The girl moved toward him a little, and William asked, "Are you afraid?" Molly looked apprehensively at the door. "I'm afraid. I'm not afraid for me. I'm afraid for Mommy. Frank, Daddy, he hardly touches me, but he calls Mommy names. He orders her around, like with a dog." William looked at Molly in surprise. "Why does Mommy put up with it?" Molly shrugged her shoulders. "I don't know. Probably because there was no prince to protect us. Now you're here. You've already saved Mom twice. Then you'll keep saving her." He smiled involuntarily. I just wanted to assure the girl that he would. As the hospital doors slammed loudly and in the corridor appeared the very type who was chasing them. "Molly, somewhere your mother," even stepped in and stared at him silently. Frank stepped toward her and was about to grab her by the hair when William pushed him away. "Take it easy on the turns. It's still a kid." Frank stared at him. "Who the hell are you?" He wanted to add some more words, apparently cursing, but leaving the figure of William, he remained silent. "I'm a human being. I hope that's enough. And I also think you came here for nothing. That's what I'm going to think. Betty is my wife. What I want, what I do with her, come dog and will bark." Frank smiled grudgingly, and William was struck by how much time had stopped here, as if he had fallen into the last century. He didn't have time to answer, because Molly came forward. "We're not afraid of you anymore. Mom said that she would kick you out, and we would live in peace with her." Frank was confused for a moment, but quickly pulled himself together. "Do not be ridiculous. People will kick out. Quickly call your own." William looked at him expressively, and Frank corrected his mother and went home to Lamb. Now it would take a long time to repent. At that moment, the door opened and Betty appeared, leaning on crutches. She looked fearfully at Frank, and he immediately rushed toward her. But Betty, you suddenly sprang to your feet and said loudly to Frank, "You have nothing to do here. Can you pack yourself, or can you wait while I go back to pack your things?" He even choked with indignation. "Do you think you can do that? Have you forgotten how I had to cover my sin, and your leg will be deprived of food for the rest of my life?" Betty staggered as if from a blow. She looked at her daughter, but it turned out she wasn't upset at all. She even smiled. "I knew such a bad man couldn't be my daddy." Frank took a swing, but William intercepted his arm, clamped it, and led him toward the exit. "My advice to you, man, don't go near them." Frank pulled his arm out and turned to Betty. "You're gonna be sorry. And I promise you I'll bury her in poverty." He stormed out of the hospital. William stared on for a while, slammed all the doors in his neck. Could men be like that? He shrugged his shoulders perplexed, but something else was still bugging him. Was it something this Frank had said? Or maybe Betty? There was no way he could grasp the thought, so he decided he was thinking it. Then he turned and walked over to Molly and Betty, who were standing hugging each other. "What's up, girls? I don't think you'd better be home tonight. I suggest we stay at a hotel tomorrow, unless you, Betty, can think of one." After you apply to move out, Betty shook her head. "Oh, come on. We've caused you so much trouble as it is." Molly immediately tugged on her arm. "Mom, I don't want to go in there. He'll be waiting for us." Betty sighed, "Daughter, hotel, very expensive. You know that. Money." Molly pouted unhappily. Betty stroked her head. William decided it was time to take the initiative. "Here's the thing, Betty. I've come to see you anyway. I'd like to ask you everything in detail first, and then I'd like to go to the site. You're not gonna say no to me. Believe me, being editor-in-chief can pay for a hotel in a small town. Go ahead. The kid's tired. And why scare her anymore?" What was Betty supposed to do? She knew if they went home alone, Frank would take it out on them. William took a single room for himself and a double for Betty and Molly. Everything seemed so shabby to him. Well, at least they were clean. Molly, on the other hand, had her eyes all over the room. "Mommy, it's so beautiful." The man walked over and opened the door to the big balcony. Oddly, the balcony fee didn't increase like everywhere else. It wasn't even included. Molly came out and froze. "Mommy, look how beautiful our town is." Betty smiled, looked at William. "Don't mind her. She's always marveling at everything. She's never anywhere." "It's all right, Betty. I'll go to my room. Dinner will be here in about half an hour, so you don't have to put any weight on your leg. I ordered it to your rooms." Betty smiled embarrassedly. "You didn't have to." William stopped on his way to the door, looked at Molly, who was still on the balcony, and asked Betty a question. "Tell me, why are you always apologizing? Trying to give up everything? Don't you think it might be nice for me to do little things for you?" Betty was finally embarrassed, but then she looked into William's eyes. "I guess I'm just used to being treated well." William drowned in her eyes for a second. He even had to shake his head to release the tension. "That's it. Wait for me. If anything, the receptionist assured me there's hot water." He shut the door behind him and leaned against it. Nah, still, something was bothering him. But what was it that William always found annoying when he failed to grasp a thought? He always knew exactly what was the most important and essential thing running through his mind. He returned when dinner had already arrived. Betty was passing out the utensils on a small table. He came over, staring at the TV. And there I was. He thought he saw me. Or Betty looked at him differently than usual. She was limping around the room, but not on crutches. "Can you walk now?" The woman waved her hand. "It's nothing serious. It's just a sprain. The doctor made my leg so tight that it was as if I was in an iron boot." At dinner, we talked about everything little by little. Right after dinner, Molly started to peck her nose. "Molly, lie down. You can see the TV from the bed." Our eyes lit up. "I can lie under the blanket and watch TV." Betty nodded, and tears came to her eyes. Was her marriage worth it, to have a child so excited about the simple things? No, there would be no turning back. The woman suddenly realized that she wouldn't have to pay any more loans. She would immediately take out an automatic payment. How long did she have to fight to get her paycheck transferred to her card? Frank. Exactly because of the loans. She had the card, but her paycheck was just crumbs. Molly fell asleep. 10 minutes later, William smiled. How good is that? The kids don't have to worry about anything. You lay your head down, thinking about work, about employees, about 1,000 different things at once, as if there is no other time. Betty smiled at a familiar situation. But if you get more tired, like on rounds, you fall asleep very quickly. Thank you, William. He looked her in the eye. Look, I'm sick of this. If memory serves, we were on a first-name basis at one time. Yes, we were. He suddenly stood up. Betty, why don't I order some wine? We can sit and talk. What about your work? We'll talk about everything tomorrow. And Molly said I had to protect you. So I'll call the editorial office tomorrow and let her do without me for a week. The wine came quickly. Oddly enough, quite decent. He poured glasses. Well, here's to the meeting. Betty nodded. And killed. He set the glass down. Betty, why don't you tell me how you managed to marry someone like that? I'm sorry, a jerk. She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at him. It was a compulsory measure. As you realize, things are a little different in the country than they are in the city. I won't say that if I'd given birth, unmarried, would have been scorned badly. No, of course not. But at that moment I was very scared, and also ashamed in front of my grandfather. As soon as I was alone, it's understandable that he would be remembered. Frank followed me a long time ago. I told him everything honestly, and he agreed. Said he'd never bring it up to me. I swore to myself that I would be a model wife so that he would never guess that I didn't love him. It was enough until Molly was 3. He'd already had me in his arms under the shouting waves. Then he decided to open some super shop for processing mushrooms, took a huge loan. That's something they're bought, but you need something to process, in addition to pass a bunch of sanitary permits. Anyway, in a fit of rage, he trashed the place. And he still had a debt, and then some more. And he couldn't hear me anymore. He used to hit me. I put up with it, because it's like a child without a father. With every failure, it was like he was going more and more crazy. And now you've seen it for yourself. Yeah, Betty, I honestly don't understand why. I mean, Molly would be fine. Betty gave him another weird look and didn't say anything. Okay, we'll stop by the courthouse tomorrow, and then we'll head over to your place. Hopefully, it won't come to a fight. Do you mind if I stay with you for a week? No, not at all. Stay as long as you like. Betty had a hard time suppressing the girls. William's up. Good night, everyone. Sleep didn't come right away. Something was keeping him awake. It was only towards morning that he began to forget sleep and suddenly sat up in bed. Stop, Molly was saying something. How old is she? The man felt lines of sweat running down his back. Now this was getting interesting. He still hadn't fallen asleep. Figured he'd get some sleep at Betty's place, fresh, healthy air and all. Frank was home. He looked at William distastefully and turned to Betty. I suggest that you apologize one last time. Apologize well, and then we can have things the way they were before. The speech was so pathetic that William laughed involuntarily. Betty walked over to her husband and gave him copies of the documents. The trial's exactly a month and a half away. Frank's face has changed. Is that what it means? So you decided to screw me with your loans, honey. I didn't see anything from there. Frank even kicked me. You have no idea what you're in for. Don't forget, your Molly is listed as my daughter. And I promise you, I will get everyone I know to talk to you about her. And then she's in for a real scare. Betty turned pale, walked right up to her husband. If you ever try to put your hands on my daughter, I'll kill you. Apparently, there was something in her eyes that Frank backed off. He quickly turned around, grabbed his bike, and rushed out of the yard. William shook his head, like he really didn't do something. He won't. He's only brave to us, but in reality, he's a coward. Come into the house. He went in, set his bag down, and looked around. Almost nothing had changed, that's for sure. You didn't have the money to change anything. No, that's not what I mean. It's the same. I don't know how to explain it. It's like being in an old Russian fairy tale. Not even referring to the street anymore. She was too cramped for a city room. I put you in this room. He came up behind her. I think. Yes. You lived here then. The day ended very quietly. He went outside in the evening, sat down on the porch bench. Soon Betty appeared. They were silent for a while. Then William couldn't take it anymore. Betty, can I ask you a question? She sighed. I know what it is. Yes, Molly, your daughter. He stood up. I don't understand why. Why didn't I know anything about her? You knew perfectly well where to find me. Betty smiled thoughtfully, raised her head to him. Do you remember what you said to me before you left? No, you said you wanted to be a good, real journalist, and not your family. There's something else that shouldn't get in your way. I memorized those words very well. William muttered a youthful maxim under his breath. Betty stood up too. William, can I ask you a favor? Of course, which she stammered for a second, then said anyway. Molly mustn't know anything. He was surprised. Why? You see, she'd have too much to explain. And you're sure you're capable of doing that. Life won't be the same if you confess. Let's just leave it as it is for now. If you're ever sure that you need it, then we'll tell you. He thought for a moment, then nodded. All right, I'll hear from you, but it won't change anything. The next 2 days passed surprisingly quietly. William asked Betty questions. Not only did she tell him what was going on here, but she took him around and showed him which lands were being bought out. By the evening of the second day, William had sent in the article and went to sleep. He was awakened by a phone call. He looked at the screen, sighed. It was his father. What do you think you're doing? A puppy? And to you, Dad, hello. I'm not being sarcastic. I asked you as a human being not to touch this subject. Don't you dare. Dad, I told you right away that I would. And this is where you have no right to tell me what to do. Everyone does his job. His job. It was like the phone was going to blow up. You don't have a job anymore. Don't get your hopes up. Not only are you not editor-in-chief anymore, but you don't work in the newsroom at all. William sat up on the bed. His eyes narrowed unkindly. He was his father's son after all. All right then. Well, what is it, Dad? People like you are no good to me. I'll take it from here. He's out. So the article's out. William lay down again. He understood what was going on in the newsroom and knew that there was more than one call bothering him today. He didn't have to wait long. It was his deputy, who had been temporarily assigned to his duties. But William, you did well. You stirred up such a hornet's nest. Ours are all on your side, especially the young and chatty ones. We were even going to organize a picket in your defense. He smiled. But of course, he knew perfectly well who was so truthful. Anyway, so far we've only been brewing for a few days. I'll be calling, reporting on the situation. It's not that simple. You've got your defenders, and they're a lot more powerful than the people who are buying up the land. Oh, it's gonna be hot. William felt regret. He loved to be in the thick of things, but he didn't have time to think. A pale Molly came running into the room. There's Mom. Frank. William jumped out of his seat. He jumped out just in time to see Frank riding his bike. Betty was lying on the ground with a white blur around her. Mommy, Mommy. Molly was shaking so hard that even the words seemed to stutter. He bent over Betty. She opened her eyes. Please don't leave Molly. Betty, what are you talking about? We're gonna rename you and get you to the hospital. Well, she couldn't hear anymore. They carried on down the road, singing slow cars. William realized that he had created a lot of accidents on his way, and each time, making a risky maneuver, mentally asked for forgiveness. Molly was sitting next to her mom, holding her mom's head in her lap. The girl was crying. She was doing it completely silently. That's why William even gritted his teeth in pity. He muttered to himself under his breath, "We'll make it. Betty, you don't dare." At the district hospital, they are met by the same nurse. "You again." She smiled, then realized it wasn't the leg. Instantly, she snatched a catalog from somewhere, helped Betty lay down, and rushed from the gurney down the hall. She slowed down for a second, opened a door, and shouted urgently. The doctor was already running after her, followed by more nurses. William sat down in a chair. He only now noticed how his hands were shaking. Molly looked him in the eye. "Mommy's going to sew, isn't she? You're a prince. Why didn't you protect her? Why didn't you?" He pulled the girl to him, pressed her close. She clashed at first, then quieted down and cried again. They spent almost 2 hours in the corridor. Finally, the doctor came out to see them. "Well, lucky your wife is a little half a centimeter, and there's nothing we could have done. It's a very serious condition. It's too early to make prognosis, but as you realize, though it's a small chance, it's there." William's up. "Doctor, when can I see her?" The doctor waved his hands. "Don't even dream about it. If all goes well, she'll be in intensive care for at least 3 days. By the way, I don't get it. Did you do this to her?" "No, it's my ex-husband." "Hold on, please. The police are on their way. You need to be questioned, but don't arrive for another 3 days. Leave your coordinates with your sister. If anything changes, we'll call you." The conversation with the police took another hour. "It'll be dark soon. But what's next?" "We'll go to a hotel and decide what we'll do tomorrow morning." The girl nodded silently. They were never allowed to go to Betty's, no matter how William tried to persuade them. He even tried to offer money. They looked at him as if he were a fool. They left the hospital. "Why don't we go to Molly's house? I'll run to work and get some things for myself. It's not very far." They drove a little over an hour. She was so pathetic, like she was alone and nobody wanted her. He also wanted to tell her everything, but he remembered Betty's words. He would have to wait a little longer, and then everything would fall into place. They entered the dark apartment. William turned on the lights. Molly dismounted, walked back and forth. "It's beautiful, but it's all scattered." He smiled. "Good point. I can't bring myself to put things back where they belong. Come on, Molly, let's find something to eat and then go to bed." He bedded the girl on the little couch. She fell fast asleep, only she still howled in her sleep. William sat across from her and watched her. He had never had such a warm, strange feeling in his soul before. It frightened the man. He suddenly felt himself becoming tender and sentimental. In the morning, after breakfast, he and Molly went to the newsroom. "The guard," averting his eyes, said William, "I'm sorry, I'm not authorized to let you in." "Come on, get me a porridge then. Tell them we're at the cafe across the street." Andrew. His former deputy arrived 10 minutes later. He looked at Molly suspiciously and started telling her the latest news. "They've sent in a new editor. Typical establishment. Doesn't understand our business, but he's on the phone with his bosses all the time. We convinced him that he has to sign off on every layout. He's so happy to sign. And today he's got a flood of people coming to him for a fight, because the articles, all of them, have distorted data." William grinned. He did not think that the staff would take his side so amicably. For the sake of such people, it was worth fighting more carefully. "You'll ruin everything. Don't worry, Liam. It'll be all right." Andrew spoke, and his son kept looking at Molly. Finally, when the girl stepped back to look at Piroshenko in the window, he asked William, "And I don't remember that you have relatives of that age. I'm also confused about one thing." William grinned. "What is it?" "The child looks a lot like you, and that makes me wonder." "You're right." William briefly told him the whole story. Andrew whistled. "Wow, Twists of fate. I take it you won't be in town long. Yes. We'll go in the pocket tomorrow. William's cell phone vibrated. He pulled out the receiver. Andrew sighed and nodded sympathetically. Father, I don't know what he wants. We've kind of talked about everything. He stared at the phone for a while, then just dropped the call. Molly came over. So, did you pick out anything? No. When are we going to Mom's? Tomorrow, Molly. They got out of the car outside the house when William's phone rang again. He thought it was his father, but the number was a stranger. Yes. William, hello. Is this the hospital calling for you? The patient you brought in has taken a turn for the worse. She needs a second surgery, and she needs a surgeon, which our hospital doesn't have. William felt a pounding in his temples. What am I supposed to do? Find a surgeon and bring him to you? No, that doesn't make sense. You don't have the right equipment. The woman needs to be taken to a regional center. The sooner the better. How am I going to get her there? There are special cars with doctors. We don't have such an opportunity. I understand. Okay. Cell phone rings. He disconnected, looked at a terrified Molly. Don't worry, kid. I'll figure something out. The man was well aware that there wasn't much he could wear with Molly. There was nowhere for her to go, though he pulled out his cell phone. Dad, you're home. Liam even gasped with surprise. That's how the prodigal son decided to visit his parents. Dad, we don't have time for this now. Let's fight later. I'll be right there. Molly was silent the whole way, and when they stopped at a beautiful house, she asked, No, come on. You have a prince, so I just have to save her. Molly smiled slightly. Where are we going? He got out of the car, helped her out. You see, Molly, I need to go to the hospital right away, make arrangements, look for help. I don't want you to come with me because you'll be tired. You'll be at my parents' house until things get better. Don't worry, my mom's good. He hesitated. And so is Dad. Their parents were waiting for them in the lobby. His father's eyebrows furrowed. Mother looks at him anxiously, though not her husband's very angelic character. But she still loved him, but she loved her son. It was all the more difficult for her when they quarreled. It had been happening a lot lately. And William, too, would not keep silent or smooth things over. Every now and then his father's temper would come out. Hello, Dad. Mom. William's mother looked at Molly in a kind of daze. The girl pitied William's leg looked tired and shot. So what? He didn't know how to knit bows. William, who is this girl? William escorted Molly to the television in her room and returned to her parents. This is my daughter, and her name is Molly. The mother clutched at her heart. The father's eyebrows went up. There was a heavy silence. You're sure, Mom? Don't start. I'm not going to prove anything to you. Her mom is in the hospital right now in critical condition. I need to find a crash cart to transport her to our hospital in the city. It's an emergency. Molly's tired. I'm just asking you to let her stay with you for a day or two. Then I'll be sure to tell you all about it. One more thing. Molly doesn't know anything, and her mother asked me not to tell her. The mother didn't have time to say anything else. Liam looked at her. Why are you interrogating me? The child is probably hungry, and she's scared of all the strangers around her. You wanted grandchildren, so go and do it. The woman hurried into Molly's room. William said thank you and headed for the door, but his father stopped him. I'm not going to ask any questions right now. Tell you everything I think about you, cut, and really worry about this woman. I'm gonna make a call right now. Tell me the address where to pick her up. William stopped gratefully. He looked at his father, who was already dialing a number. Yes, with his father's help, things would go much faster. Betty felt that everything was wrong. She didn't really know what was wrong with her. Everything hurt strangely. She couldn't remember what had happened to her. Maybe she'd been in an accident. What kind of accident could there be in the woods? Memories rattled around in her head. She seemed to have the right one. Frank, yes, she saw Frank coming through the wicket. Betty had thought at the time that he hadn't come to Will because the look on his face was too hostile. She nudged Molly run inside the house, daughter. Molly backed away a little, but did not go into the house. Betty was honestly more worried about her than herself. Frank stopped not far from her. The pause dragged on. Betty felt more and more anxious. "Frank, you get the stuff." He smirked. "So you actually expect that after you've ruined my whole life, after I've covered up your shame for so many years, I should just pick up my stuff and leave?" Betty shrugged. "Well, you do realize that sooner or later it would have happened the way we lived. You can't live like that." "Why not?" "I, for one, was fine with it." And then Betty got carried away. "Of course you were. It's so convenient to just give orders and do nothing. Honestly, Frank, I don't know why I didn't kick you out sooner. You need to get your stuff out." "Wait, one more question. This guy is your lover. You gave me the horns with him." Frank's face was twisted, and Betty was scared shitless. It was obvious that he was in a complete frenzy and not in control of himself at all. No, she wanted to go to the house, but Frank suddenly grabbed her by the hair. "You're going to answer for everything." Betty saw out of the corner of her eye that Molly had rushed into the house after William, and even exhaled. William would solve everything now, protect her from this monster. But the next moment, a sharp pain pierced her stomach and her eyes went black. The last thing she saw was Frank's twisted face. Die. Further darkness. She kept thinking about Molly. How she'd be without her. She wanted to open her eyes, but she couldn't. As soon as she thought about it, as soon as she decided that she was going to open her eyes, she fell into a viscous, sticky darkness. Now she was awake. She realized she was awake. There were muffled sounds like this. She must be in a hospital. A noise so similar. Betty opened her eyes. It was semi-dark and smelled quietly of medicine. Just a little bit, but you can catch the smell. I was very thirsty, so much so that Betty was ready to get up and go in search of water. She tried to lower her feet to the floor, but the sharp pain prevented her from doing so. In fact, her legs were completely unsteady. Neither did her arms. But then Betty's familiar face leaned over her. Well, she finally tried to smile, and she had to ask where Molly was. But William disappeared as quickly as he'd appeared. A female nurse's face appeared in front of her. She wet Betty's lips, and the woman immediately felt much better. "Molly. Where's Molly?" "William again? Don't worry, Molly's fine. She's at my parents' house. They all get along great. They went to the water park yesterday." Betty smiled gently. "So it's okay. It's okay." She wanted to ask something else, but her eyelids poured with heaviness, and she fell fast asleep. The nurse adjusted the blanket. She was sleeping now, not unconscious, but asleep, and in her sleep she was getting better. "Come morning, I'll be here to observe." William nodded. On some impulse, he took Betty's hand and pressed his lips to it. Betty was awakened by a noise. It was already light outside the window. "Good morning. How are you feeling?" Did the doctor lean over her? "Yeah. He's had his hands full with that patient. It's been a long time since he's had a case this bad. That's why he's treating her differently. She's okay, I guess." The doctor's rubbing his hands together happily. "It can't be any different, can it?" "No, it can't. So many doctors fought for your life. Well, get well." He was gone, and Betty smiled. How good is it that she's alive? The door rattled open, and she heard Mommy, Mommy, Molly. The girl rushed to her, but didn't hug her. She stopped. Then she took her hand gently, pressed her cheek against it. Tears sprang from Betty's eyes, but in a second she saw a whole delegation coming through William's door, and with him some woman and a man. William's men bear a great resemblance. It can't be. It's his parents. She remembered from their previous acquaintance and from their first meeting that William's father was a very complicated man. Betty squirmed fearfully, but the man smiled. "But hello, Betty. I really wanted to meet you. Molly has convinced me that you are an extraordinary woman. Betty shifted William's confused gaze to the woman and then to the man. She felt awkward, to say the least. After a while, she and Molly were alone. William went to find a doctor and his parents went home, telling Betty to get well soon. "Molly, how are you? All right, Mommy. I live in such a beautiful house. Grandma got me new sneakers and Grandpa got me a tablet. I can play a little game or watch a cartoon before I go to bed. Even though there's a TV in my room. Can you believe it? Mom, every room has a TV." "Wait, Molly's not the cameraman. Why are you calling strangers grandparents?" Molly sighed tiredly. What kind of adults are difficult? That William, her father, she guessed almost immediately. She didn't understand why everyone was hiding it from her. "Mommy, what strangers? I already know everything. In fact, Daddy and Grandma and I are already thinking about where you're getting married." Betty has learned her eyes. "What's what?" "Mom, it's a wedding. You do realize you need to get married." Molly calmly reasoned about such things, which not only to talk about, but also should not have known. Though it's pointless now. Say William's dad and Mom know too. Molly nodded. "Well, of course, Grandma figured it out right away. She said I'm a carbon copy of Daddy." Betty sighed. Molly impatiently froze. "Mom, but what about when the wedding is?" They didn't hear the door open. "I guess we have to get Mom's consent first." A smiling William looked at them. Molly turned anxiously to Betty. "Mom, you do agree, don't you?" "Really agree?" What was Betty to do? She just nodded her head. Really, there were huge butterflies plowing around in the shower at that moment. "But what about my forest?" William sat down next to her. "Don't worry about the forest. We'll be there very often. I've decided that I'm much more comfortable as a regular journalist. I can work remotely, so your forest isn't going anywhere." Betty smiled. "Thank you." He looked at her very seriously. "Thank you. I just now realized that I've been living a completely meaningless life. And now I'm happy now. I have you. That will be the meaning of my life." He took Betty's hand tightly, then Molly's. "You're the most precious thing I have now, aren't you?"